So I want to tell you and talk a little bit about the difference between a shared world and a shared reality. And they're bridged by what I call the shared experience. And you're thinking, okay, what are we talking about? We get a little meta here. I'm like, just bear with me. One of the interesting things is that a lot of times what happens is we are oftentimes placed in what I call a shared world. What does that mean? That means almost in every place that you're at, whether it be school, church, or work environment, whatever the case may be, when you're in a group environment, your world is typically structured and your culture and your ecosystem is structured so that it supports everyone that's there. So what happens is that when you're there, you all have the same shared world. Like now, give you a example. Let's use work environment for example. All of you have the same expectation in terms of when you're supposed to be there. All of you have the same expectations in terms of what time you eat. All of you have the same infrastructure in terms of leadership hierarchy. You all have the same type, even the same spaces that you work. It's all the same. So what happens is that you get used to being in what I called a shared world. That means everybody's world is the same. Nobody's different. You know, your cubicle is probably the same size as the cubicle next to you. Your office is the same size as the person next to you. That tends to be what we're used to dealing with. The problem with being in a shared world is that sometimes what happens is because we all came into this world together, there may be an inclination to think that we have the same shared realities. Now, it doesn't always happen like that, but sometimes it does. And what do we mean by shared reality? Meaning the gateway by which you came in and what you have to deal with on a regular basis is shared in terms of having similar experience. Now, there are going to be people who say to yourself, we all know we're different. We all know we have different things going on. We all know when we walk out the door, we're all living a different life. That's not always the case because even though we may consciously know that, subconsciously, we sometimes think we're similarly situated. And that's probably the best phrase to say it. It's not that we believe we have the same shared reality. I think the reality is that we think we're similarly situated. So why is that a problem if you're like Black Generation X and you're moving into this new space? Now, here's what you got to keep in mind. For our parents' generation, when they were moving into certain spaces, especially professional arenas, they didn't have, even though they were sharing the world, they did not have a shared reality. They were coming into a reality where they may have been in a space where they never had anybody of color. And if they did have people of color, there was a certain level of hostility against those persons of color for being there. So for them coming in, there was no shared world because there was also no shared reality. Because coming in, you had to deal with adversity, you had to deal with resistance, you had to deal with animosity. Those were inherent things that ensured that one group of people had a different shared experience and reality from another group of people. And I think most of us understand that. But by the time we came up, the idea, the impression was that we may be coming in, but we're now sharing a world where those things that the animosity, the challenges, the things of those nature, hostility, were not as prominent. And so the downside of that, the upside, of course, is that we're now in a work environment where you're free from being in a hostile work environment. The downside is that you start getting in your mindset that when you see individuals who look like us coming into your space, that we may be the exceptions to the norm because now we probably have a more similar shared work experience. We may have a more similar shared reality to the persons that are there because there's this thought process that, okay, if you're here, it's probably because your reality is similar to mine, which is why you're here. Now, of course, you got the whole, affirmative action thing, but we'll let that go for the side for a second. But think about that for a second. Imagine moving into a space and now you're finding yourself in a space where you are the only one or the only two, or whatever the case may be. There is that possibility that there are going to be people who are going to say, the average masses are not normally here, but you're here. Therefore, there's a greater likelihood that maybe you're similarly situated. But that can be dangerous because what ends up happening is that you end up clouding your view of making the assumption that this person's situation is so similar to yours that you discount the realities of what they have to face. I'll give you another great example. Let's use college as an example. When I went to the University of Tampa back in 1987, when I walked into the campus, there was a shared world. We all went to school and classes in the same building. If you were in ROTC, we used the same ROTC building. If you were on the swim team, it was the same pool. If you were in the nursing school, you were in the same nursing building. If you were in dorms, you were all in the same dorms. We were all in the same place in terms of the world that was created for ourselves. We all had the same stressors. We had class assignments. We had teachers that we had to deal with. We had advisors that we had to interact with. We had financial aid, student loan. All those things was a part of our shared world. Now, the reality is that we weren't all similarly situated. And most people will say in the college environment, that makes complete sense. We understand that. But think about it from this standpoint, because sometimes what happens is that people may low key not realize they're signaling that they're not similarly situated. For instance, I rode the bus to school, and we're not talking about bus like a local bus. I rode Greyhound, and that took me about 24 hours to go back and forth. And I've shared that in various videos and so forth. But imagine if I'm engaging with someone and they're so used to flying home, but then when they talk to me, I'm telling them I'm riding the bus. Now, it might not click in their mind automatically, but I can tell you what it does on my standpoint. From my standpoint, I came from this mindset that people who had money, people who had means, people who had paper like that flew. They could ride the plane. People who didn't rode other means of transportation like the bus or the train. I put myself in that position where I didn't feel I was socioeconomically in the place to be able to fly. Therefore, I rode the bus, which in my mind, whether they knew it or not, signaled to me that if I'm dealing with you and you're flying back and forth, and that's not a problem, because you figure you're flying 4 times a year, to college and back from college, spring and the fall. And so for me, I'm looking at it from the standpoint that you're in a better financial position, in terms of the world that you're in, because you don't have to worry about the stressors of going back and forth in terms of flying versus riding in the bus. But it even gets more groundbreaking than that. When I'm when I'm around from a socioeconomic standpoint, and I'm seeing people with, microwaves and small refrigerators and phones and all those things in their place, and I don't have those things, again, it signals to me that I am not similarly situated as you. But take the socioeconomic out of the equation. How about the race standpoint? Think about this for a second. If you are a non-black, let's say if you're a white person and you're sitting in a class and there's 30 people in the class, but there's only one black person, you may not think anything about that one black person being in the class. But I can tell you, as being that one black person, I am. Because what that's signaling to me is that I'm the only one here. That means I'm not saying that I have to have somebody that looks like me. I'm telling you that I am the only person here, so I have nobody else here that looks like me. So that tells me that my reality is very different from yours, because your reality is used to interacting or having a lot of white students around you. Mine is may not necessarily be the same case. But now my reality is that I'm having to navigate the fact that I'm dealing with students who don't look like me, just like they have to navigate the fact that when they're engaging me, I'm the only one in the class that looks like me. And so what happens is that sometimes the danger that pops up is that for those persons, and this is not trying to be funky or wonky or anything like that, for those persons who think, okay, we're in the same shared world. Oh, Tony, he's a cool kid. Yeah, but what they don't realize is that there are certain realities that I have to experience once I leave the school. Like I used to my running joke used to tell people all the time, when they would come and they would either ride with me back to Arkansas, or when I was stationed in North Carolina, and I'm jumping all over, so kind of forgive me here. I made the comment that I said, do not allow yourself to fall into the trap of thinking your reality of where you are here is the same when you leave. Because there are parts of this country where time has stood still. And I don't want you to ever be in a situation where all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh crap, I didn't realize it was like this. Yeah. Jumping as an aside, one of my close buddies used to come visit me in North Carolina. And one time when I was stationed up there, he decided he was going to take the back roads. And so I told him, I said, okay, a couple of things. Make sure you fill up your gas tank if you're traveling through the night. Slow down when you're in slow time. So in towns, and if possible, stay on the interstate. I really would rather you not go through back roads if you couldn't. He wanted to just see what it was like. After that, this is a black guy. He found never do it again, because everything I told him to be mindful of, he saw. He noticed that as soon as he got into towns, the lights went off. He noticed the speed traps in terms of the rapid decline of the speeds and so forth. He also became hyper conscious of the fact that once he put gas right off the interstate, he didn't see another gas station for like 200-300 miles, and he'd never seen anything like that. Because guess what? He realized, and I wanted him to know that from the standpoint that you are still in the deep south. There are still people who have a certain reality that they expect us to adhere to. I'm not telling you that you can't move accordingly. I just need you to understand that even though there are people in here who we share the world with them, there's an experience that they intend for us to have when it comes to dealing with them in certain environments. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but here is the underlying point that I'm trying to make, is that sometimes it's very dangerous when you are in a shared world where you have an ecosystem where you all are operating and moving in the same space, to fall into this belief and thought that how you maneuver in that controlled environment is an example of how you came into that environment, that you're similarly situated accordingly. It's not always the case. The danger of thinking that is that by doing so, you risk a very definitive possibility that you are not going to be as acutely mindful of what dangers they've had to deal with or adversities they've had to face, so that you can assist them accordingly when that presents itself. And it goes both ways. But I'm purely coming from my standpoint. Is that a lot of times what happens, and I've had these conversations with some of my white friends, where when I tell them certain things and they just have this look on their face, and I didn't realize that was your reality or that was your experience, and I had to tell them politely, don't allow yourself to feel that because we move in the same world system, that my reality is the same as yours when we leave here. It's not. And more importantly, don't allow yourself to let my education and my demeanor and my professional well-being give you the impression that gives me a pass from some of the things that you may see others who look like me have to experience. I experience those exact same things. You just don't see them because, one, I don't tell you about them. Two, you don't see them because you're not with me when they happen. And three, it's a reality that I have embraced and taken on and challenged in terms of how I adapt to it, that you've never had to deal with. And that's one of the running problems, that sometimes what happens when you're in a shared world and people instinctively think that you're similarly situated in terms of your realities coming into that world. What ends up happening is that they don't think or take into account that your experiences and how you maneuver not only protects you when you're in your shared reality, but it also protects you when you're in your shared world with them as well.